Hello, welcome to part 3. So I'm quite excited about this. I'm going to be running through quite a few bits of Miro, about 12 slides to get you through. So that'll be fun. But yeah, it is quite exciting because I think this is the first time I'm probably giving you some practical advice that you can use, whereas before I've been heavily into the history and theorizing and things like that. So let's see. Let me just get started. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through Kanban, Scrum a little bit, but it's more about specifically in the games industry, what the customized views of Scrum in particular might be. And next time I'm going to cover Kanban in more detail, but I'll let you know about that at the end. But you're probably already reading this table, so let's get on with it. Spoiler alert, I'm going to give you most of the answers at the beginning so that it will make more sense to you when we talk further in. But if we look at Kanban, for example, there are differences between Kanban and Scrum, which are very well known. If you know anything about Kanban, you'll know that it's about continuous delivery, right? There's not even the idea of a sprint. You just keep adding things. Work's pulled through the system, single piece at a time, all right? And changes can be made at any time. And that's one of the beauties of Kanban. You measure cycle time, which means the flow of work from left to right, right? How long did that take? That's your cycle. And you develop from operational environments and deals well with high degree of variability in priority. So these operational environments, these DevOps that I mentioned last time, the DevOps teams, this is where it came from. I've worked in those teams and I've helped implement Kanban, and I've looked at this idea of continuous improvement around process as well. And we'll talk a lot more about that next time. But for now, look at that high degree of variability in priority. Well, hang on, that sounds like game production, doesn't it? High degree of variability in priority. You'll be hard pressed to even know what kind of priorities there might be in game production, but that's what we're going to fix, right? So it's these chaotic demands from all directions that can come in, but overall, you've got a plan and you're trying to stick to it. That's what Kanban does really well. So what does Scrum do really well? Well, firstly, what is it? Time box sprints, right? So good at supporting committed time constraints. In other words, you can say have a 2 or 3 week sprint and say, that's our time box. Okay. And at the end of that, we're going to present, we're going to do the ceremonies. We need to have deployed something, etc., etc. Work is pulled through the system in batches, the sprint backlog. Now, I would rephrase that to say that you push a big batch of work into a sprint, and that's what you've committed to do for your sprint backlog. But sure, it is pulled across once you've pushed that batch in. So no changes allowed within the sprint. Remember, you have a sprint goal and you say, this is my goal for this sprint. As a team, we're going to achieve this. And then you commit to that and you stick to it. And if there are any changes, they have to be agreed by the product owner and the scrum master and the team. There has to be a bloody good reason for it, even to the point of shutting down the sprint because what you're doing is no longer useful, right? But normally you would say, go away. Because why? Because you need to be left alone to work. Because what you're working on is generally very complex, very difficult. And you just need to get on with it if you're going to meet these deadlines, right, of delivering things that you've committed to. You measure velocity, and I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this idea that you look at how much work you've committed to over, say, 2 weeks, and then you see how you burn down, right, or burn up, how fast those things move through, and that's your velocity. And this idea of an average velocity over time is what gives you confidence that you can commit to work. Because if you understand how quickly you work as a team, plus you understand your capacity as a team, and you understand how you estimate work together as a team, that's great, right? You've got velocity, you've got an idea of how much you can actually commit to, and all those things interact with each other, right? And then appropriate in situations where work can be prioritized in batches that can be left alone, as I just said. Now, that means that Scrum is great in the games industry, in game development, for exploring and trying out in a highly complex environment. In other words, particularly at the beginning of making games, it's great, right? Because you can say, you bunch of people over there, go off and explore this thing and bring back information when you know more, because we really need to know. And spoilers is what I'm going to give you now, right? So this piece, so I say concluding at the beginning here, right? So let's just look at this. So Kanban, if you're just getting on with your work and your planning can be interrupted by changes and chaos, like me having some tea, well, I am British, then basically you know what you need to do. And Kanban's great for that because you can just shove the work in. And yeah, sure, you prioritize the work and you pull each time there's more work to be done, and you pull it across. You just get on with it. Kanban is great for that. By the way, Kanban is not just a board. Kanban is an entire methodology and more, right? So don't think I'm just talking about moving things on a board. I'm talking about the whole Kanban mindset, methodology, etc., principles, processes, whatever. It's great for supporting the harebrained schemes of explorers and designers who are trying out and need help but are unpredictable. Why? Because they're going to come to you and they're going to say, you know how you're working on all that stuff? Well, I need that person in your team to come with me and work on this thing that's pretty mad over here, because we really need to know if it's going to work. So we need to borrow that person for 2 weeks. Sound familiar, right? It's what you have to deal with all the time, isn't it, as a producer? You always have to deal with that. If you're a dev director, a dev manager, a project manager, a program manager, a producer of any kind who is involved in this kind of project level, right, with teams, that happens all the time. And normally you're like, oh, God. But imagine a world in which you have a Kanban system that handles that perfectly okay. Because that's the DevOps model, right? The DevOps model says we use Kanban, and the way we use it is we have all these swimming lanes where we've got work moving across, which is our projects that we need to do. And we also have a systematic list of repeatable work we need to do, say every month or every week, because we have to do things like upgrade something or onboard a new person or whatever. And we just whop out a bunch of stuff that's repeatable and off we go. And maybe at the end of each month, we have to do some maintenance on a system, or we need to do some backups. But these are known, right? They're known and they can just repeat them. But at the top, usually you have your expedite row, swimming lane. And expedite means this is more important than our normal work, okay? And underneath expedite, you also usually have, with say DevOps or IT support or whatever, you normally have a section which is requests for help, right? And you'll probably have some service level agreements on how quickly you respond to those, which feed into your prioritization. But then you have normal requests, you have project work, right, which is the stuff that you're trying to do in the background to say, do your repeatable monthly work, but also the projects that you're working on to explore and improve, not explore, but to improve, say, AWS, right? Maybe you've got AWS in place and you need to do a bunch of project work on that to implement a bunch more services, right? And it's not that urgent. You can do it over time. And then there's the expedite. And the expedite bit in DevOps is, oh my God, my hair's on fire. As you can tell, not likely in my case. Your hair's on fire. We need some help. Come and help. We need somebody who's an expert in X, Y, and Z. You've got one of those. I need your help, right? And it's fine because you go, yeah, okay, that's fine. That's what the expedite's for. The expedite says, we will all, if possible, swarm on this thing here and get it across. Now, in our case, I would argue, the swarming doesn't happen necessarily within a team who are on Kanban. It's more likely you're going to have someone taken from your team, okay? And we'll come back to that in a second. So more and more of your planning and team structures will become Kanban as time goes by, and the discoveries and changes are fewer. Why is that? Because Kanban just says, look, we've got a massive backlog. It'll never run out. And it's fine because we are going to prioritize that backlog. We're going to categorize that backlog. We're going to use all the different methods of optimization and reduction of waste and all this sort of thing, right? That comes as part of Lean and Kanban. And we're going to implement all of that and it will help us. And also we're working on continuous improvement. So we're trying to always make things better, but we start at where we are now. Then there's Scrum on the other hand. Now, Scrum it's there for exploring. It's there for working on really hard things. So it's great to use this at the beginning of a game, right? So if you're exploring and trying things out and you're designing, you're thinking, you're failing, you're trying again, there's a lot going on that you're just like, oh God, I should try this, try that. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. Let's try this. We've been asked to find the fun in this thing here, this whole thing. And it's like, how are we going to do this? Maybe it's a new feature. Maybe it's a pillar, game pillar. Maybe it's an enabler. Maybe it's whatever it is, right? It's like where we're not sure if it's even going to work. And we just don't know, right? What are you doing? You're information gathering, you're trying out, you're iterating, you're increment across the increments, right? And this is where you can mix and match, right? Where you can say, right, I say here, you can mix and match, you can come back to Scrum when the situation demands, because Scrum teams can be spun up, they can go off and explore, they can generate the information that's required, and then they can break down and go back to their original, let's say Kanban teams. And what that means is that you can be flexible if you understand how to use Kanban and Scrum in the game's development process across different phases of the game and whatever. So there you go. I've just given you the answer at the beginning, and let's plow into this, right? So when you're building something, let's say you're building a wall, you work on bricks, right? Now, obviously, I'm going to immediately apply that to work here. So let's say you're a producer and you've got a team working on a bunch of stuff, and they're working basically, you can see in the bottom left there's work, and they're working on. And what they produce is, say, a brick, right? Now that's, in other words, a piece of the puzzle. And what does that produce over time? It produces multiple bricks. But we're not really interested. We're not interested in tracking how long it takes to make each brick and whatever, right? What we're interested in is this vertical movement. There are multiple bricks that have been supplied upwards, okay? And they've been supplied upwards by a team. And then as you can see, there might be multiple teams who are supplying multiple bricks. Why? Because someone's going to slap some mortar together and build a wall, right? And you have a wall. And those pieces get passed upwards. And it's very easy, and this is the only reason I've got this diagram here, it's very easy to get lost as a producer because you're so busy in the bricks and the work, right? But you must always bear in mind that this verticality of tracking and movement and passing on assets that are being produced and artifacts upwards, that's why people are working, right? Nobody works in isolation. And I have seen this so many times that when you get busy and when individuals are busy, they forget that they're contributing to a greater whole. They're building a wall. Now, maybe the wall in our case is, say, a feature or a pillar or whatever, right? And we'll look at that next. Maybe it isn't, but it probably is. It's probably contributing to that. Okay. Now it could be contributing to a whole bunch of, say, DLC content. It could be contributing to season pass content. It could be contributing to live ops events. It doesn't matter. The fact is, you're not just another brick in the wall. See what I did there? You're just not another brick in the wall, right? You are individuals in a team, all contributing to something that will have an impact upon the game. And the vertical movement is more interesting to think about and talk about than this horizontal time movement at this level, okay? Time's very important at, say, the multiple bricks level, particularly for the people who are waiting to deliver, like, say, a game or anticipating whether we meet certain deadlines or not. But just at the moment, just think about that, right? Everything that's being done here, if you are blinkered and you can only see this view, you forget the bigger picture. And as soon as you forget the bigger picture, you forget about Scrum and Kanban, and you forget about why you're doing a thing, and you forget mostly that you're supposed to be feeding upwards and you're supposed to be giving information. Now, let's look at this. Now, before you start screaming, this is a blueprint of sorts. Games work on blueprints, right? And what's a blueprint? it's just an architect's map, like you can see in the background picture. It's just an architect's map. It just says put the bathroom here, right? Put the lounge over there. I don't know, whatever. Depends what you're building, right? But maybe you're building the tallest hotel in the world, and you just got to slap more and more levels up, and you're going to put scaffolding out, and you're going to build foundations, and right back to the bricks. You're going to build your can put in your steel frames, etc., right? And there's an incredibly interesting piece on how the Empire State Building was built in one of the books that I got on lean and product development. And it's really interesting because you see there how they used scientific principles to make sure that they did that in a way that was just faster and better than anyone had ever done before, right? And even back then, putting a building up like that, people were thinking really hard. How do we optimize? How do we get everybody together at the same time? How do we bring in all the right amount of bricks and make sure that they've all arrived along with everything else that's arrived all at the right time so that we can get it up to a particular level and we can make that work, and we can have the electricians and the plumbers and whoever all working on that all at the same time? Sounds to me a lot like some of the games where you're having to put a foundation down and you're having to understand what the levels are going to look like, right? What your game levels are going to look like, and et cetera. So, and this is what I'm going to cover next time in some of the Kanban and Lean stuff. But for now, let's just look at the blueprint. It's your map, right? It's your map of the game. How's your game supposed to look? And if we start at the bottom, it's stuff like your interfaces, your economic model, right? So with games as a service, GAS, games as a service, maybe you've got like a free-to-play model, and you're going to have to earn some cash through like season passes or whatever, right? KPIs and metrics need to be determined. Live ops and content need to be determined. Like, how's that going to work when the game goes live? Community server scaling, etc. A lot of what's down here, possibly with the exception of interfaces, a lot of what's down here can wait. A lot of what's down here can be worked on over time, right? And isn't going to be impacted enormously by some of these things. But on the other hand, if you're talking about the beginning of a game, the blueprint of making a game, some of this stuff, it's just too early, right? It's just too early. But some of the fundamentals are still going to be the same, and you can still make some guesses, right? And I should say at this point, I'm going to do a special section, next part, on mobile gaming, because it is my belief that a lot of this applies to PC and console and larger scale games, and that some of the smaller indie and mobile games, they don't have to worry about some of this stuff, right? And I'll do a separate piece on that. But for now, let's just talk about, I'm going to say a normal game, but of course, what I mean is like a fairly complicated, complex game. So then you've got core systems, and I kind of repeated that and say that there's multiple core systems that you have to work on if you're making a game. And some of those core systems might be there for you through middleware. Some of them might be there because you've been working in the same studio for 15 years, 25 years, and they're just there for you. But some of the stuff you're going to have to work on from scratch. And some of it you're going to have to upgrade and implement from new versions of things that you might not have used before. Then there's things like tech art setup, scripting and automation. Good Lord. Spelling mistake. Bam. Scripting and automation, etc. So there's a lot going on, as you would say, under the hood, right? There's a lot going on that foundation level where you say, well, we can't really build everything until that foundation's in place. And the foundation isn't just laying down some concrete. The foundation is also understanding how are we going to do all the wiring? How are we going to do all the plumbing? How are we going to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, right? How are we going to do all of that stuff? And that's very complicated. It depends a lot, right? On, well, where are you releasing your game? On what platforms are you releasing your game? And how big is it going to be? And is it going to need massive server support, or is it going to be a single player, like tight narrative game, and etc. Right? I mean, there's huge amounts that you need to understand. How do you understand that? Because it's in your blueprint. The blueprint is an ever-evolving map, and it starts at your game vision and pillars. It starts there. It starts with, or what's the kind of elevator pitch of the game you're making? Oh, okay, so it's a bouncy bubble that's going to roll around mazes in a kind of an isometric way and have physics, and sometimes there'll be enemies or pits that you fall down or whatever, and the objective of the game is to roll over coins and score points. Got it. Okay, well, in that case, We probably don't need to bother with 95% of what, say, a first-person shooter multiplayer Call of Duty clone might have to deal with, right? So by knowing the type of game from this vision perspective, then you can quickly say, right, okay, I kind of get it. This is probably what we're going to be doing. And I covered that a lot in the road mapping session as well, that you should go and have a look at if you haven't. But, you know, these green bits here, a lot of this you can start working on fairly early, because you'll go, well, okay, I get a general idea, and I'm fairly experienced, intelligent, and I'm in charge of this area. I've got a good idea of roughly what you're going to need from me, right? Maybe it's an audio person going, well, okay, we're going to use this audio system, and it's fine because it will fit in with what we're using in our middleware, and it's okay. We got you know, I can get on and source stuff, and I carry on. Whereas if it's maybe for a game with a vision that's enormous scope and scale and enormous budgets, the person in charge of audio might go, well, it's too early to choose actually which one of these two things we should use, and I'm going to need to actually put most of my attention on building a team up and you know, assigning work to them and trying to work out and plan as I get more information in, like what we're going to really be concentrating on. So again, it all depends, right? But generally, the stuff in green and blue, you could say, well, in green, I should say, a lot of that you can kind of just get on with as soon as you've got a rough idea that there's a vision, game vision and pillars, and roughly what they are. Now, looking up at these bits here, we've got a mix of understood pillars, core pillars, right? And not quite yet understood core pillars. So we might have a core pillar which is going to be about, say, how we must make sure that, I don't know, character movement is handled in an extremely fluid way because we're dealing with somebody swimming underwater or something, and that's a core pillar, is to make sure that it looks exactly like swimming underwater and the physics involved and the whatever. I don't know. I'm not a game designer, as you can probably tell, but that could be a core pillar. And I've got some examples in the next bit, just so we're all on the same page. So you might have these core pillars, and you might understand some of them. And I've used the word understood because, especially at the beginning of making a game, there's some stuff, like maybe the 3 Cs and other things, where you can kind of guess, right? You can go, yeah, okay, I get it. I get, like, if it's the marble rolling around this isometric, like physics-based thing, I kind of get, like, what a couple of the core pillars are and how they're going to work. On the other hand, I've put in some blues here of not yet understood core pillars. And these are the bits which are kind of like maybe your unique selling points, right? Maybe the ball is going to be furry and is going to stick sometimes to surfaces. And you're like, well, okay, if that's a core pillar, I'm going to have to work on that. I'm going to have to have a little think about that. God, it's a good job I'm not a game designer, I'll tell you that. But in that case, there's some work to be done investigating and exploring. And when that's the case, you need to do that stuff as quickly as you can, if possible, and you need to decide which are the more important discoveries that need to be made, right? So that you can focus teams on those first. And that piece is very, very important and difficult if there's a big argument going on about, well, you can't have my person because they're working on core systems. And no. We're putting together all these plans, our team, so you can't have anyone from the team. It's like, no, hang on. At the beginning of making a game, there's going to be a lot of this. There's going to be a lot of people going, well, I need to put a cross-discipline team together. A strike team maybe, or a discovery team, or whatever you want to call them, right? I like discovery team. I think that's sexy. And this is what we're going to talk about a little bit, right, soon. So there are understood game loops as well, and maybe some not quite so understood game loops, right? And again, game loops, you kind of go, well, say in mobile, you'll be like, well, you know, it's all about the game loops, right? And maybe you kind of combine two very, very popular game loops together and see how they work and whatever, right? And maybe in your particular, like, say, console game, you're going to have several game loops and in different areas of the game, right? Depends what the sort of game is. And you might have some you understand and some you don't understand. Now, when you understand a core pillar, let's say, what that really means is you understand the systems, the mechanics, the requirements. You understand things like art flow requirements and whatever else. Okay, I should have an et cetera there. But you naturally understand, if your team's got experience, you naturally understand there's a whole bunch of things that need to be done there. And you could sit down and you could make a little roadmap out and go, all right, for this core pillar, boom, this is what that means. Just like you can do for core game loops. You can say, well, if we're doing that core game loop, that's the elements it's going to touch. And these are the elements that we understand and these are the elements we don't understand. So you can start to map that out in a roadmap form and to raise things that need to be investigated and particularly raise a bunch of questions that need to be answered, right? And this is where that not yet understood stuff comes up. So we might have a not yet understood core game loop, not yet understood core pillar. What does that mean? It means, well, we don't know what the systems, mechanics and requirements are. We don't know what the workflows are going to be, etc. Right? Most importantly, up top left, well, I say most importantly, pause for a cup of tea. Most importantly, a lot of games have this core mechanic, don't they? And they say, right, a core mechanic. So in the case of the marble game, whatever it is, the core mechanic is it's got to be able to roll around in such a way that feels really like it's like you're in there and whatever. Again, thank God, right? I don't do game design. But the core mechanic. So that core mechanic is sometimes you base the whole game around it. And you say, if we don't get that core mechanic right, we're doomed, right? If we can't nail that, then, and maybe maybe you're doing a game in which there's collaboration, and the core mechanic is co-opetition, as they might call it, right? Collaboration and competition between the, say, 4 players playing together, and that's your core mechanic. Is you need to be able to support the players playing together and cooperating, but also have an element of competition between them. And if you can't nail down that, that's a really bad example of a core mechanic, right? I'll show you some better ones. But the core mechanic, if you can't make that work, your whole game fails. Now, if you say, well, is it going to work then on day one? People will go, we don't know, do we? Why? Because there's a bunch of core pillars, there's a bunch of game loops, there's a bunch of stuff that we need, right? Core systems, etc. There's a bunch of stuff that's just not in place. And so there's a bare minimum that needs in place before we can really test that core mechanic and the core pillars are really all feeding into each other. Now, you might call that a prototype or a proof of concept or something, right? Whatever it is, it's the point where you go, well, because we've been able to discover a bunch of stuff and because we've now been able to bring together some working software, we have enough of a working game, right? Touching different elements, that we can say, yeah, we've nailed it. That core mechanic, yeah, we've nailed it. And that process of exploring and discovery is going to change your blueprint, right? Your initial blueprint of a game is going to be very different at the end in most cases. So let's look at some examples, right? Just so we're on the same page, and just because I'm a bloody idiot and I don't know anything about game design. So things like, I said about the web, well, I didn't, but if we were to look at, just go back a second, the core mechanics, right? Marvel's Spider-Man core mechanic is the web swinging, right? A textbook example of brilliance, right? So traversing, how good it feels. Can you imagine a Spider-Man game in which it felt shit to swing around? You'd be like, oh my God, no one's going to play this game, right? Look at the Batman games and some of that stuff they do really well, like punching people in the face and dropping off of things onto people and whatever, right? There's some core mechanics in there which are just brilliant in some of those Batman games. Look at things like pillars. So stuff like Diablo 3, approachable, powerful heroes, highly customizable, great item game, endlessly replayable, strong setting, cooperative multiplayer, Undertale, The Last of Us. Like, look at these sort of things, Last of Us. Some crafting, story, AI partners, stealth, right? These are core pillars. And then core game loops. Here's a simple one. Defeat enemies, get a reward, level up. Now, if you get the Miro board off of me, which you're welcome to have, I've got the sources of all this stuff in there, so you can just click on them and it'll take you to this stuff, right? But just so we're all on the same page, if you think about it, this stuff might not have looked like this at the beginning, or maybe the core game loop in RPG looked like that. But at the end, right? When the game actually comes out, you can look back and go, yeah, I get it. I get why Undertale, why we're saying narrative, combat, character's choice. At the beginning, it might not have looked at that because they had to explore. They had to try things out. And when you try things out, you get to change things, don't you? You get to change your mind. You get to go, oh, God, that's not going to work. Why did I think that was going to work? We'll just drop that, forget about it. All right, so now, if we look at this again, and I've reordered things around a little bit here, then I've put the understood stuff at the bottom, right? So if you look at the blue stuff, right, that hasn't changed. But it can be worked on and developed over time, all this blue stuff, right, including interfaces. And the green stuff, right, so I've called that your prep work on the right. The foundation work, right? So it's low risk, it's well understood, but it's a hell of a lot of work. So every time you steal an engineer to go and do something sexy over there, what's happened is your foundation work slowed down. Every time you have to steal a tech artist, because let's face it, they're pretty rare. Every time you have to steal a tech artist from some other group, you better be ready to give them what they need to do, right? And then they'll go off again. But this foundation work, it's very important to understand that this is just foundation backlogs. They're just backlogs that are sat there and they need to get done at some point. And at some point, if they're not done, you're going to be in trouble. But at the beginning stages of making a game, you've got more time, right? And you might be best to do things like focus on scripting and automation so that your art team can be empowered because you know they're going to need some stuff soon, right? It's a case of what kind of game are you making? But it's foundation work, right? Low risk, well understood, hopefully. Mostly confident is the next one up. This is your understood core pillars, right? Now, I say mostly confident because, okay, you understand your core pillars, but for all you know, they're going to have to change quite a lot because of the stuff you don't yet understand, right? And the impact of things like core mechanics or whatever on this stuff, right? You don't quite, I mean, you've got some confidence, right? You're like, yeah, okay, a ball's going to have to roll using physics and we're going to have like, you know, things to go down and stuff to come up. Get it? I get it, right? We can start work on that. That's the core pillar. Great. We can start on that. Now, it could be that 6 months down the line, that's completely changed. Well, not completely changed, but there's been like a lot of enhancements or a lot of changes that have been made to that because you realize that there's a much better game under the hood. Like now you've done some exploration. There's a much better game there if you do something slightly differently. So even the core pillars can change a bit. And you need to be ready for that and not assume that they're set in stone at this point. So then the rest of it is well, I've got here understood core game loops, right? Now they're kind of like actually like mostly confident, right? In I'm assuming. But then the rest of this stuff up here is the need to explore and discover, then reapply. And when I say reapply, I mean reapply to, you know, the way I've got these arrows going. So you might have a core pillar that until you really have a look at it to see what it's going to be and how you're going to do it, you're not entirely confident, but it might end up impacting things like your scripting and automation needs, or there might be one that impacts on your economic model, right? There might be one that impacts on core systems, right? There might be one that impacts on another core game loop, right? Or on a core pillar. Particularly, there might be a whole bunch of them, which is kind of the reason that you might be front-loading a lot of work that have an impact on your core mechanic or core mechanics, right? What is this? This is all trying things out, exploring, discovering. So at the top is a whole bunch of exploration and discovery work, okay? The sexy stuff. And at the bottom is the even sexier stuff of things like the core systems, the foundation work, etc., right? Which is where if you don't do it at some point, then you're dead in the water. But you don't want to commit too much until you've done the discovery work. And this is the beauty of game development. This is what makes it so exciting and different from any other industry that I know of, is that you go in there and you go, oh, wow, I wonder if this is actually going to work. We better find out right early, because if this doesn't work, we're going to have to think of something else. And if it does work, it's going to have a massive impact on what we think we need to do in engineering, right, for example. And so there's all this stuff to do. There's this like big area of uncertainty. There's all these risks. There's the idea that if you set the concrete to dry too quickly, then it could dry so quickly that you're not ready and you're going to have to break it all apart and start again, right? If you understand things 3 months down the line that you really should have understood now. All of which, by the way, is completely normal. And you might screw it up and you might not be ready. Because, why? Because you're doing something so hard that it's no wonder we have so many issues with meeting deadlines and et cetera, at this point, right? And I'm talking about the point of discovery here, okay? Further down the line, when you hit full-on production, you might discover some problems that stop you in your tracks and go, oh my God, we completely forgot that if we do this core pillar, we have to make this extra stuff here. And that's going to like cost us 300 grand and out budget. We can't afford it, right? Or that will put us back 6 months, right? You can't tell right now. Some shit's going to go down, okay? So what we need to do is we need to understand that there are these runways that are running at different speeds for different reasons. And your job, again, go back to that bricks and mortar example. Your job is to never be too blinkered in the bricks and mortar, but to constantly think about this picture, right? How are things influencing each other? What's the thing that's going to change here? Where are the biggest risks here? All right, so let's move on. Now, finally going back to talking about Agile, right? Let's look again at this bit at the top. Now, here's all these not yet understood core pillars, right? This core mechanic, not yet understood game loop, and how it could all influence the core mechanic, right? It might not. But in order to test it, like I said, you need to put all this stuff together, right? I don't know if it's all that, might only be a bit of it, but things need to come together, okay? And on the right-hand side, there's some of these questions that you are information gathering, right? So what are the systems, mechanics, and requirements that are going to come out of all of this? What are the art workflows and requirements? What about UI and UX? What about live ops and content, et cetera, et cetera? It completely depends, right? More to the point though, in the middle, what are the other impacts and dependencies of what you're doing? And dependencies are something which are going to come back in the next part again and again, right? Because dependencies is where you need to have your prioritization really sorted out. So, impacts, dependencies, right? Over here, information gathering strengthens our planning capabilities and confidence. So, you need to empower and support this exploration, okay? Because it brings information, and information is critical at the beginning of all of this. This is perfect for Scrum, or as I say, customized Scrum. Let's call it hybrid Scrum. Hybrid Scrum. Because Scrum deals with complex unknowns. And guess what? You don't understand how this core pillar is going to work. It's a complex unknown, isn't it? So why not use Scrum? Because that's what Scrum does really well. Not vanilla Scrum, right? Let's pull it apart a little bit and I'll show you that next, right? Or nearly next. But we're still exploring and trying out in a highly complex environment. Boom, Scrum, right? Let's just use Scrum. And if we move on to the next slide, guess what? We've just moved down to Kanban. Because this stuff at the top here, which you just saw above, right? All these not yet understood stuff, is where you're going to get these changes coming down and these cries for help, because people will be saying, I need that person in your team. They're the only one who can help me with this, right? All those requests that are coming in over time diminish because you know more and you're not experimenting as much, okay? Now, if your game lasts a couple of years, you're going to always be experimenting to a degree, right? But it could be, or it will be, that over time there are fewer of the more kind of frantic, frenetic requests, right? Because the information that you need to gather will lessen as you get on with it. Particularly when you hit full production, you don't really want to be in a situation where there's still a lot of unknowns, because the risk that you have, you will exponentially go off on the wrong path and waste all that work is too high. It's too expensive as a risk. So this bit at the bottom, right? These are all these low risks, and we worked on, developed over time. right? It's the stuff where somebody can go, look, I know enough now to just, I know that for the next 3 months, right, I've got enough work to do. And because you're going to want this system, I'm just going to get on and do it, right? Because you're going to want it. And I'll make sure it's flexible enough that when I know more detail, I can customize it. But let's face it, I'll just get on and do it, right? I mean, it could be as simple as putting on Real Engine 5 in place, right? It could, whatever, I don't know, right? It could be something much more simple. And it could be something where people are saying, I'm going to need to know more in 2 weeks. But again, that's fine, because that is the verticality that's so important for producers to always have in their heads, right? So perfect for Kanban, because chaotic demands from all directions coming in, right? But the plan evolves and develops over time. In other words, you've got some understood systems, mechanics, requirements, whatever. There's a bunch of work that you can be getting on with, just waiting for somebody to come in and go, I need you right now, right? Because that's your discovery teams. That's where the information needs to be gathered from. Perfect for Kanban. And over time, as things calm down, and as there's just a bunch of work to do, again, Kanban's perfect. And next time I will go really in much more detail about why Kanban's perfect. But for now, right, let's just look at Scrum. So this has been customized by me. Okay, this is a suggestion of something that you might already be doing or something that might work for you. But let's look at the left-hand side, right? So inputs from creative leads, learnings from design, all influence the product owner. Now, in this case, I believe if you're looking at exploration and discovery, in most cases, it's some senior person in design. You might have a design director or a design lead, right? A senior designer. Generally, in my opinion, and in my experience, they make good product owners. Why? Because they understand what you're supposed to be trying to do and what you're trying to find out. They can answer your questions. And that's what your team needs. They need answers to questions, right? What are we doing and why? What should I be doing first? Right? Why are we doing this and where's it come from? And they can also feed upwards and get learnings downwards from what's going on elsewhere that will feed into all of this, right? Because remember, you can't be an isolated team. You've got to work vertically. You've got to. You've got to be getting, well, and horizontally in terms of other teams working, right? But you've got to know what everyone else is doing and how that's influencing what you're supposed to be doing. So I call that a discovery backlog for discovery team. And team select starting at top as much as it can, commit to deliver by end of sprint, right? So it grabs as much as it can from the top and goes, right, we're committing to do that. Now, I think that if you're looking at getting information and it's critical enough, maybe you want a 1 week scrum, right? Maybe you want a 2 week scrum, because at the end of that scrum, you're going to have a demo and you're going to have a look at your discovery progress and say, have we done enough? Do we know enough? Right? And all that. So you don't want it to be 4 weeks. You don't want to disappear for 4 weeks. I should drink this faster. It's getting cold, but I think I'll just forget about the whole thing. So your sprint planning process can be quite light because you don't need to spend half a day on it. You could spend an hour on it, right? And you go, look, it's fine. And in fact, like the design lead and the producer could sit down and go, right, basically, this is what we need to be working on. Because the team might not actually know, because you're not a software development team, right? The team might just go, well, we don't know what you're supposed to be doing. You're in charge. You tell us, right? Now, okay, that's not pure Scrum. Like I say, this is customized. I don't care, because there are certain bits of Scrum which are brilliant, right? The whole iterative loop, the whole learning iterative loop is perfect for this. So you take a bunch of work and commit to it. Now, it's optional there, because I know it's very hard for a team to say, we're going to be able to do that in a week, right? So maybe you simply are going to go, look, sod that bit. But I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather you tried. I'd rather you just said, okay, here's the top 3 items each person's going to be trying to do in the next week, right? We're going to try. Because then at least the individual in the team has committed, okay? And that's important. It's part of why Scrum's great and why Agile's great. It's the commitment, right? Being accountable to your team is important. Producing work that the team appreciates and being able to say, this is why I was able to meet my goals, or this is why I wasn't. That's a brilliant thing, right? People appreciate that. Being able to say in a stand-up, what I'm doing towards the sprint goal, and you should still have a sprint goal, what I'm doing towards the sprint goal, I'm 3 days behind, mates. I'm 3 days behind, right? And my tea's cold. Oh, that really is cold, actually. I don't want that. And then being able to say, I need some help, right? And at that point, maybe somebody will get some help for you, or they'll just go, that's okay. But if you don't commit to work, it's just that horrible grind of next, right? That you don't want, because guess what? You're in the discovery team. You're like rapid response explorers, right? You like going exploring the Antarctic. You're in the jungles, right? It's like an element of danger and excitement. You're like, pilots, fighter pilots. You've gone all full Top Gun. Okay, so, I don't see what the problem is. Commit to some work. Why not? Right? Try it, because people like it. People like having goals, especially if you're not a judgmental prick about the whole thing, and you support them, and they're able to stand up and actually explain why they're going to fall behind or why they're going to come in early, right? Now, okay, so you've got your discovery backlog or product backlog, right? And then you've got your sprint backlog, is what you've committed to as a team. Maybe it's 1 or 2 weeks, right? Sorry about some of these images, by the way. There's nothing I could really do about that. I didn't have time. Sprint end date and team deliverables do not change. If it's 2 weekly sprint, make it a 2 weekly sprint. Just stick to it, all right? Don't piss about. Particularly because if you've booked in regular meetings to reflect on these ceremonies, some of these ceremonies that you're going to do, you don't want to mess with those with busy people, right? Because it will just fall to pieces. So stick to it. The deliverables as well, right? I mean, if you've committed to something, try and deliver it. Because there was a reason that you guys committed to it. And maybe you spent an hour planning that out, what that was going to look like. And maybe at the end of the process, you're going to spend another hour going through where you're at, right? Because some of the people, especially leads, are going to want to know, well, what have you discovered now, right? And that's the thing over here. Like, do we now know enough? I've replaced, by the way, the need for a workable piece of software and CI/CD, etc. at this level, because I think it's irrelevant. I think what we need here is, let's just call it discovery progress. For example, if you're working on bosses, right, you're going to evil boss man, final level. Is this the evil boss that we want? And you've spent 2 weeks and you're not there. You sure as hell need to be able to give some answers on why you're not there and how much more time you think you need. And also help. Get some help. Because that's what the demo above is for as well. You're demoing, right? You're showing... You're probably going to be sitting there with, say, I don't know, a senior design above you and maybe a creative director or an EP, or I don't know, it depends what your team's like. You're going to be presenting something and saying, well, we reckon we've nailed it. What do you think? Okay. And getting some feedback. Or you're going to say, I don't think we've nailed it. I think we're going to need some help from person XYZ. What you shouldn't do is assume that you can't go and get help during that 1 to 2 weeks. Okay. Again, you are not an isolated, blinkered team or individual. You are perfectly entitled to go and talk to people. Maybe in your organization, you need to go and talk to leads rather than direct people so you don't interrupt them. That's okay, right? Now, who can help you with all of this? Oh, look, the producer. I've put the producer in there as Scrum Master. You are not the product owner. I see some crazy shit out there with people who are producers who have got no experience in things like game design, saying that they lead design teams and make design decisions. Why? What made you, have you done a design masters or something? What made you so great? Get the hell out. You are not in charge of a team, right? You are the Scrum Master. That means that you are a servant leader. Go and look it up. Go and look up what a Scrum Master does. Quite a lot, right? And I hate to say it, but you're also kind of like an Agile project manager, and we'll come to that next time. But you're a Scrum Master, man. You're not a design lead, right? And in fact, the design lead should be the person leading this team. Now, in some smaller companies where you have to be, say, you have to take on a product owner role because there's simply not enough people around, try doing that in a humble manner. Try doing it in a manner in which you confess that actually the product owner role needs to be merged in with some of the people on the team who know better than you, right? Don't be a little emperor or empress or whatever the word is. Just be a bit humble, right? You're supposed to be a servant leader, okay? You're there to help people. You're there to reduce noise and uncertainty and fear. You're there to make sure that they work in a safe environment, that they can feel secure doing what they love doing. You are not there to show off, and you're not there to make design decisions if you're not a designer, or engineering decisions if you're not an engineer, or art decisions if you're not an art lead, right? That's not why you were hired. You weren't, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you were hired as a creative producer in design who needed to make design decisions. That's fine. In that case, if that's what you were hired to do and you have the background and skills, that's fine. You be the product owner, right? And you can be the Scrum Master at the same time. I don't care. But please, if that's not your background and not why you were hired, get the hell out of that role, because it's not you. You're not going to make the best decisions. And maybe you're screaming at me, yes, if only somebody could take over that role from me, you sanctimonious bastard, I would be able to sleep better. That's fine. Scream all you want. I'm here for you. I love you. I support you. That's quite true. It's quite true. And which means that you have missing people from your team, right? You need product owners to take over from you, and you can't. In which case, you should at least make sure that you demand audiences with, say, the design leads and creative leads, so that you can say, I shouldn't really be doing this, by the way. So can I get some help, right? Can I have a daily meeting in which the stuff that's discussed, I can just check with you that the decisions that I need to make are what you think too, so I can learn from you, right? And so if you can do that, that's fine. But that's why this is a customized view, okay? Now, all that said, if you need feedback really fast and you're not really confident, have a 1-week sprint. Just do it every week. Because that demo process where you're showing somebody who's supposed to give you feedback, right? Creative leads, exec producers, whatever it is, who knows, right? That is where you can learn a lot about the direction you're going in. And if you have created enough valuable information that they can make a decision, or if your PO can make a decision, right? If that's what they've been enabled to do. Okay. Now, I think every week it's worth doing a quick process retro. I don't think a full retrospective's valuable because it's highly likely that your team will not exist over the long term. If that's not the case, if you have a long-term team and you know that it's going to be doing this exploration and discovery work for long enough, 6 months, 12 months more, fine, do a proper retrospective, because that'll be important because your team's together that long. But if your team's going to come and go and mix and match and just disappear off the face of the planet after they've done this bit of discovery, right? Don't bother doing a full retro, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Just do a quick one, 15 minutes, right? Just grab people together at the end of a stand-up and say, right, it's the Friday stand-up, right? So it's at the end of this stand-up, I just want 10 minutes of your time, 15 minutes of your time. Right, let's have a quick chat. Right, the process, how can the process improve? I guarantee you, if you talk about the process improving, people will have problems and say to you, well, it's a bit stupid because I lost a whole day because I had to wait for the X and Y. And if we just did A and B, I wouldn't have to do that. That's valuable, right? And you can share that as the Scrum Master producer. You can share that with everybody else, all the other producers, right? You can share valuable feedback. And you can also make changes. You can enable them. You're a servant leader, okay? Of course, you can only do this stuff if you really... You can customize Scrum if you understand what Scrum is. So again, I'd go to scrum.org and just refresh, right? Just refresh yourself. Now, if we have a look a little bit more at this. So bang, bang, boxes, boring, horrible diagram, sorry. But if we just stick with, let's start with the producer bit, right? So you got a producer here, Scrum Master, who is talking back and forth with the design lead, the product owner. I've said design lead. I don't want to anger you all, right? But in my opinion, most of the discovery and in my experience, most of the discovery and work that goes on is probably a design lead. It could be a product manager, right? In mobile, might be a PM. So that's cool. That's cool. But that person, that PO, if you remember what that means, it's the product owner who owns the product, right? It's the product owner who understands what it is you're supposed to be doing and who can answer questions and who can go to the customer. Now, the customer in this case, guess what? It's your creative leads, right? Whoever they are. And what's the primary function there? Prioritization and scope discussions. So if they say, oh yeah, I like what you've done there. Now, can you do it 10 times bigger? At twice the speed? You know, that's the sort of thing, right? Or when they say, you know what, you've nearly nailed it. I want you to spend one more sprint on just having a go at this thing here, and then we're done, right? That's the kind of feedback that a design lead, or PO, design lead, and a creative leads can have with each other, right? That's the discussions they can have, and then feed that back to the team, right? You as Scrum Master, you're enabling everybody. You're a servant leader. You are, you know, super awesome, right? Your primary function with the team, mediator, organize, facilitate, right? Design leads, primary function, responsible for the focused vision. Now put focused vision in there. Why? Because there's a big vision. But then there's the focused vision, which is our bit here that we're working on. Maybe it's a mechanic, maybe it's a pillar, maybe it's a feature, maybe it's whatever, right? We're exploring something. It's the focused vision. It's the focus down on like this little bit of it, but it's part of the bigger picture. So where does it fit into the bigger picture? So you don't get blinkered, right? So focus, vision, scope, constant communication with the team. Okay. And then they work back and forth with the designers, say, engineers, maybe, art, maybe, right? And these people here are doing the actual work I put here. Now, in my experience, that design lead is also doing the actual work. The only one not doing the actual work here is you, right? As a Scrum Master, because you're not supposed to be doing the actual work. Okay, traditionally a Scrum Master is part of the team and are actually also doing their own work, but that's not the case here, right? I mean, unless you're an art producer and you're deeply experienced at being like an art lead or a character artist, and that's what they need and you need to step in and help. But God, I hope not. I mean, it depends, right? If you're in a small team, that's life. You wear all the hats. But when you start to scale up and things start to get bigger, you really want to step away from that. You want to be able to remove yourself from that and be able to look around. And there's so much to do as a producer, right? In this model in Scrum. Because remember, the discovery team is discovering things. And when you are discovering and trying things out, what happens is you don't meet deadlines. You discover things you never thought. You go off in tangents that need to be stopped by the design lead and the producer, right? Let's say you produce things which are completely pointless. You need to be able to fail with your head held up high and say, that's fine. You know, failure is part of the pitch. That's fine. No worries. I failed to deliver on this thing here because it was a test. Great. Got more information, right? Information gathering is what it's all about. Look up here. Exploring one possible path. What are we discovering? That's the iterative process. It's discovery of information. The information, without judgment, right, needs to be passed to those creative leads and to the design lead so that they can think about it and talk about it and work it out and fit it into the overall, I've put here overall design. Right, I know that there are examples where this whole example here, there are some examples where it's going to be, well, actually, it's not a design lead leading this thing here. It's a product manager, or it's a tech director, right? Or it's creative director, because that's how things are for you, right? But I'm just using this example because it's a coherent example, I think, for most of you, that you can understand what I'm talking about here. You've got your cross-departmental team here that's been ripped out of like perfectly happy Kanban teams, are doing this thing here. Why? Because they need to generate information. What are they going to do after they finish generating information? Probably return to the other teams in a lot of cases, or spin up new teams, or go to a new team, I should say, that's been spun up, right, to explore something else. But maybe they'll stay together. I doubt it. In my experience, because those big teams that stay together are probably going to be the less exploratory teams with the more stable backlog who are using Kanban. Okay? Now, what does that all mean? And I just want to... I've only got one more frame to go, actually. What does that all mean? It means, overall, that you've done a whole bunch of stuff. Everything's now understood. And it's things like, here you go. Oh, yeah, I definitely want that core pillar there, right? But this core pillar here that you thought was understood, it's like, oh, actually, no, we're going to need to fix things because we've discovered a lot. But this core pillar here, when everything's been put together, you go, oh, I love that. That was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I love this one here too, right? But maybe this one you've understood and you've gone, we're not doing that. That is way too much work and it just doesn't, we understand it, but we're not going to do it, right? And that's fine. That's part of the discovery process, isn't it? And like another one here, the game loop, you go, oh my God, I'm not doing that. And maybe you've got core systems which need to be fixed because stuff that you've been discovering that you need to do, right? And maybe you realize you need a lot more help in tech art, surprise, than you thought. And it's like, help, we're going to need a lot of help. And then you can plan ahead. You can try and get those people, right? Or change plans or whatever. Economic model, you might go, oh God, we need to fix that now because we've discovered some stuff up here that we want to do. That. Do you know what I mean? So the whole thing, all this discovery work, it's going to change the blueprint and it's going to change some of the requirements, some of the mechanics, some of the flows, some of the process, some of the people you're going to need, the budgets even, the timelines. That's why you tend to try and sort this stuff out earlier on, okay? And why that Scrum team model is really good, because that cadence of feedback and discovery is great. It's brilliant. Information. And down on the left, right, so we have a core mechanic we now understand because we've been able to put this stuff together and have a go, right? So you've got honed vision and design. You've got Bibles and guides that you can now really hone down as well, whereas before they were probably a bit guessworky, right? Reduced need for change, reduced uncertainty. That's huge. Whole perspective. I had put Gestalt, but I realised that that's a little bit confusing. What I mean is you're getting, as a team, you're getting a perspective of the whole game, right? And if you're a planner, that perspective of the whole game is critical. You can see the bigger picture. And that comes with a shared team understanding of the game. Because until you get a lot of this stuff sorted out, a lot of the people working on the game are like, we haven't got a clue what the game is. We don't know. I mean, we've been told it's like this, but from what I've seen, it's nothing like that. I saw some people working on this thing over here. I don't even know what that's got to do with the game. So the more you can have that whole perspective, the more you can present to the whole team, the more you can show the whole team what you're doing, the more you can look at your honed vision and present that back to the team, etc., etc., etc. It would reveal new horrors, of course. Always. It will reveal new terrors. But it will also reveal new opportunities. And they might lead to new discoveries, right? They might could lead to another game being developed, right? But it could lead to a whole bunch more work, or the possibility of negotiating more funding to get a bigger team because you've got this great opportunity that's come up because of what you've been doing. Who knows? Not me, right? And then you can plan the hell out of it. Because before all of this, you can't plan the hell out of it. Not really. What you can do is have a good guess. But if you think back to what I was showing you, I'm sorry about making you go blind, to this one, that's what this is about, isn't it? It's saying, well, we can't really plan much right now. We can plan a bit and we'll get on with the stuff that we do until we have those teams being rolled up, right? Those Scrum teams that need to discover and explore that are going to rip people out of our teams. And then that's fine because we know now how important it is to support that and that it will simply slow down other things. And because we're able to track vertically and visualize vertically, roadmaps, plans, etc., or at least we will be, that's the next part, do all of that stuff, we can also track the impact, right? And we can track that against real deadlines which we can't afford to miss, etc., etc. Okay? So, hope you like my lovely icons. So next time, we're going to cover Kanban. Flow your boat. And Scrum team composition, estimates, mayflies. So mayflies live for 2 days. Okay, that's just to remind me that Scrum teams live and die too. Architects and blueprints. We need to look a little bit more at that. Dependency tracking and vertical brick passing. Go back to that, right? But that's building the scaling view, right? And program level planning and tracking. That's all about the scaled view. Not scaled agile, but the scaling of how you can track things, how you can say pass cards from boards up to a bigger scale, another board, right? And all that sort of stuff. And also, I'm going to do a complete version for mobile, because most mobile games that I'm aware of, large scale popular mobile games, are much less about exploration on this scale and are much more about knowns. I'll tell you what I mean next time. And anything you tell me you need to know. So if you watch this and you go, oh my God, I've got 15 questions, please ask me them. Email me, right? You can go onto the game production website if you want, and you can use the forms there. Subscribe to the newsletter. Please like this. I haven't asked you, I've completely forgotten to ask. Subscribe, like, blah, whatever. Basically have a lovely day, right? And again, I'm only doing this because I think that we're not supported properly, right? Producers. I just think it's so hard and no one really talks about this sort of thing. And I just want you to know that this is a suggestion, right? And that I think by the end of these parts, let's face it, there'll probably be like 2 more. By the end of these parts, you should at least feel like there's some standardized ways of doing things and there's ways of like linking information together which you weren't perhaps aware of, and it might help you out, right? And it might not answer every detailed question you've got, but I'm here, you can ask me. I might not have all the answers. In fact, let's face it, I won't, but I know a bunch of people, so I can talk to them. I've got some talks lined up with some really good people. I just kind of need to get some more questions off of you lot. All right. So it's been emotional. And luckily, I've just double checked. I had this nagging feeling I'd forgotten to hit record, but luckily I did remember, which will make it a lot easier now for you to watch it because I remember to record it. So have a beautiful day and keep the faith. Remember what you're doing is incredible and that there are millions of people out there who can't do what you can do. So be beautiful. Let me know I'm beautiful and then we'll all be happy. Okay, see you in the next part.